Gwen Watkins, the wife of the late poet Vernon Watkins, is an established author. During the Second World War she worked in the intelligence section at Bletchley Park. In this audio interview Gwen talks about her childhood and how she became part of the code-breaking team at Bletchley Park and meeting her future husband there. She also recalls how Dylan Thomas failed to turn up as best man when Gwen and Vernon married. Gwen also recalls her reaction to the death of their friend, poet Dylan Thomas. Lastly, Gwen gives a brief insight into her husband, Vernon Watkins the poet.
I was born in West Bromwich, and my parents were quite poor, I think. My father was a relieving officer. He was given a district, and in that district he had to find out the people who really didn't have enough money. He was very good at it because he had been poor himself. He came of a fairly poor family, and he knew what it was like. And even though Bournemouth was a rich place, there were quite a lot of people who didn't really have enough money. He was really intent on getting these people into, I don't say into money, but somehow into some state of life in which they could meet other people and have enough. I went to a beautiful school in Bournemouth called Talbot Heath. Oh, it was a lovely place. The school itself was in grounds up with a lot of trees and things, I've always loved trees. I had a very happy school days, I think, because I don't say clever, but I couldn't do maths. I just couldn't do them. But apart from that, I was pretty good. I've always been good at languages. I met somebody who, in the Air Force, because we all had to join something or other, and I joined the Air Force because I loved airplane. I loved the sky. I always liked being up high. I was quite happy there. What you did then was you joined one of the armed forces. Somebody who was very good, I thought, interviewed you. Because in the war, they were terribly keen that if you had any good qualities which could be, helpful, that you put them at the service of these. And it was very sensible, I think, because many people had different languages or were very good mathematicians or something, and nobody ever knew about it. I joined the Royal Air Force because I thought it was romantic. And also because there were 3 services, you see, and I liked the one that had the nice uniform. It was just that. Well, why was I posted to Bletchley Park, which we all knew was a special place, a special service, We expected, if we were linguists or mathematicians or anything special, you stood a chance of being posted to Bletchley. What Bletchley wanted was to get all the best people in any service. And that's very sensible, really, in the war, And as I was a linguist, I was good at languages. That's where I was posted. And I enjoyed it very, very much. I always thought it was a good service. If somebody had posted me to mathematics, I would have been hopeless. But languages, yes. I spoke German and I spoke French. I could read Dutch and things like that, because if you know 2 languages, you soon got a sight of other. So I was posted to the linguistics department, which I liked. I loved it because there were very, very clever people there. Really very clever. Well, what I did, because I was good at languages, we communicated then by telegram. You know what I mean? You hadn't got time to write a letter or anything, but you could easily, with permission, send a radio message. And I was there to collect these radio messages in any language that I could, you know, and then send them on to the chief place. And I think it was a very good thing, because in wartime messages were going backwards and forwards all the time. And I think if you were somebody, a captain of a legion, you might easily miss important ones. But we didn't. We had a special section whose business was simply to read all the telegrams that came in, and anything that you thought suspicious or difficult or unusual, you pulled it out and took it to headquarters. And I think that was very sensible, because that way you didn't miss anything, you know. I mean, in many places which didn't have very good officers, perhaps, hopefully thought that somebody would tell you something if there was anything important. But they don't. You miss things that way. And Bletchley Park was entirely dedicated to not missing anything. And so it suited me, because I was good at languages, and I was also good at, if I thought a message was a little bit dicey or something, taking it to headquarters. And we had this service that if you read all the telegrams that came in and wrote down to send to headquarters anything you thought important, that way they didn't really miss very much. There was one time when the Navy wanted to have a review. Now, I wasn't in the Navy, I was in the Air Force. But the Navy sent messages to all the other services and said, is there anybody who knows anything about any armed service or anything like that? If there is, could you interview them and just tell me if there's anything important? And that way they gathered, you know, messages that might have passed by and do anything. But I thought this was very sensible. Yes, it was a lot of work, but so what? You know, I was very happy in the Air Force. You weren't exactly promoted, because there were sections. First you came in and you just did, you know, it was ordinary work. And if you had any special thing, there was somebody who at some time would say, Gwen, you speak German. Well, you know, I thought that was very sensible, because if you had any special asset, or you were found. They didn't, in most other services, I think, they might know you spoke a lot of languages, or they might not. But here they were dedicated. As soon as you arrived and were in this service, somebody was bound to investigate. Because for one thing, you might be a spy. You might be dedicated. You know, there was a large body of people who were not there for any good purpose, who were there to do something, find out something, make something bad, you know. People always thought that that the intelligence thing of Britain was wonderful. I mean, my thing was that I spoke German. So I was put into a special place where there were a lot of German messages being interpreted. I thought the intelligence service of Britain was extremely good. I did think it was, really. And that gave you confidence, you know, because I think in many places, if they said, oh, you speak German, do you? Oh, well, we've got plenty of people who speak German who don't. You know, it depended entirely on the upper level. And I thought we had people in the intelligence service who were extremely knowledgeable and extremely clever. I was very glad to be in that service. There were ordinary messages which were passed like ship Dordogne arriving in harbour so-and-so. And then you knew to have them waiting to interview all the sailors on that ship. What did their intelligence did they have? You know. And I thought it was very well done. I really did. People say that the intelligence service of Britain was a great muddle, and of course it was a great muddle. Intelligence is always a muddle, but they did have this way of extracting from anybody who knew anything that was of value, of getting it. And I thought that was very good. You were interviewed when you joined the service, you see. They didn't leave much untouched, as it were. If you knew any foreign language, if you had friends in other, you were submitted to this real interrogation, you know. They found out pretty well anything they could from you, which I thought very good. Because what is intelligence but finding out all you can, whether it's useful or not? I was in a special section of the Air Force, and so was he. That was how we came to meet. I must have been something like a sergeant when I joined, and he was a flight sergeant. And I was in his, I don't know what you call it, flight section. That's right. That's how I met him. The only thing I was ever good at was languages. And he was there to find out who spoke German, who did anybody speak Dutch or anything. He knew languages so well, you see. He knew French and German. He could read Dutch. He was also a mathematician, you know. He could do sums, which I never could. I still can't. He was one of the people whose job was to, because I spoke some German, to train me further, to train me to pick out what was important of this service. That, you know, most of the services, you did what, if you were a sailor, you went on boats and things. But I was in the intelligence service, and that was dedicated to getting out of you anything at all, however tiny, that could help about intelligence. And I think that's partly why we won the war. Here's somebody that knows German. What is she or he doing with it? I want to find things out. Whereas many other services, they just said, oh, you speak German, do you? Oh, well, that'll be quite useful. And I thought we had an exceptionally good intelligence service. Not much could get past them. And that's a great thing, because very often some small thing, you know, oh, I saw that ship, the Deutschland, yes, I saw that. Where did you see it? When did you see it? What was, you know, the intelligence, I thought, was extremely good. If they heard or thought or saw anything which seemed to them to be slightly dicey, it was investigated. And that's what really makes an intelligence service. It was a very important place. That's the thing. Oh, yes, he was a tremendous, a great asset to them. No, I loved being in the Air Force. I really, really liked it. So many good and noble people were serving, you know, and it was wonderful to be with really, really very good people. Somebody saying to me one day at Bletchley, we've got the Deutschland coming in. You know, you won't believe this. They've captured the Deutschland, come down to the harbour. and you saw this magnificent, beautiful German ship being brought in. I thought it seemed awful in a way to rejoice over the thing that shouldn't be rejoiced over. You know what I mean. It had to be done. That's the thing. But that didn't make it any easier to do at all. No. No, I thought our intelligence service was about as good as it could be. And you don't often say that about a service, an Air Force service. So it was wonderful to do. But anyway, we did the best we could. And doing the best we could, it was a help to intelligence. And you can't have any better help than that.
Here Gwen recalls when Dylan Thomas failed to turn up as best man on Gwen and Vernon's wedding day.
And he didn't turn up, did he? We had to find somebody rapidly, because it was inconceivable you should be married without a best man. That would be a real downer, you know. So we had to find somebody.
In this section, Gwen talks about Vernon the poet.
Poetry was his great passion, you know, in life. It really was. People say, people are very fond of poetry. You couldn't say that about Vernon, because poetry was really his life in a way. He wrote poems, and he liked to read to anybody who wanted. Many people are shy about what they've written, but he never was. If he'd written what he thought of course he published a lot of poetry at the time, but if he wrote something that he thought a good poem, he would say, look, shall we have a lecture and I'll read this? He was not at all shy about, if he thought he'd done something good, he didn't see why it shouldn't be publicized, you know. So people thought he was rather showing off, I think. But, you know, to be with someone to whom poetry was his life, there's no doubt that with Vernon, poetry was the most important thing in his life, really. And you had to put up with that. I was very, very keen on some poetry.
Gwen recalls when she heard of the death of poet Dylan Thomas.
He loved Dylan. When Dylan died, I think, nobody expected Dylan to die, you see. You know, he was young and easygoing when he died. But it was a surprise. Why did you didn't expect him to die? He was young, he was clever, he was everything, you know, and then suddenly he wasn't there. It was a great, great loss, I think. To be able to appreciate poetry is a great thing. Because a lot of people can't, can they? They say, well, why is it all in lines like that? They just don't understand what poetry is. And if you find some friend who does know what poetry is, you tend to, hug him close, as it were.